Welcome to another edition of our Sunday Night Live at 5. Tonight, we're going to be talking about self-awareness. Everybody that comes to me to do work, this is one of the biggest areas I coach on because almost everything filters back to self-awareness. Self-awareness is the starting point to everything. I cannot communicate who I am to somebody else if I'm not sure of who I am. And not sure of who I am includes all sorts of things. And we'll get into what that really means, but it's more than just saying, I know myself. I know what I like. I know what I want. That's not really what we're talking about. And a lot of people cannot, they can say they know what they want. And then when I ask them to actually verbalize it, they cannot. And this is where the inner work has to be done is to figure out and name the things that we are and name what our shortcomings are and what our strengths are, because then I can actually communicate that to somebody else. I get it a lot when somebody comes to me and they're like, I know what I want in dating. And I'm like, okay. And how do you know? Well, I'll know it when I see it. Okay. Well, explain and describe that partner to me. And I would say 95 to 100% of the time, they cannot describe what they're actually looking for. And so it makes it very difficult to be able to be in a relationship if you can't communicate to that partner what you are and whatnot. It's like trying to communicate to a blind person, right? When we have to try to communicate to a blind person, I have to be descriptive to them. When it comes to a relationship, we're talking about emotions that are inside of us and what we're feeling. And if we don't understand that we have to communicate that to somebody that is blind, that cannot physically see our emotions, then we have to be good at describing them. If we're not good at describing them, we're not going to get very far, okay? I use this analogy. It's the mirror before the window. You can't express something to someone and expect them to understand what you haven't taken the time to understand yourself, okay? We spend so much time scanning for red flags in other people that we're looking for bad communication, lack of empathy, and inconsistency. We rarely stop to take that look inward and say, the truth is that if I haven't looked in the mirror, I can't honestly look through the window to see these things in other people. I can't even spot them in other people. And the reason why I say it's so important is that if I don't understand what those red flags look like in me, I'm going to go blowing right past them in another person. And if I go right past them in another person, I get well into a relationship. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, why did I not see this earlier? You did see it, but you didn't understand it because you haven't done the internal work on yourself, okay? That's why it's so very important that we start our journey, whether it's dating, relationships, or anything, that we start with understanding ourselves. And again, it goes into business relationships and all sorts of different things. It's not just on the romantic relationship level. So self-awareness is extremely critical in business, being able to communicate to your subordinates and to your superiors on what's going on in different situations, okay? Because once we've done the job to learn how to articulate things inside of us, we're going to get much better at being descriptors to that person on the situation at hand, okay? So again, the mirror before the window. You must understand your own emotional wiring, triggers, coping mechanisms, and unmet needs before you're going to assess someone else's intentions. Without that reflection, you'll see threats that aren't there, or worse, you're going to miss the ones that are, okay? So what is self-awareness? If I had to describe that, okay? Well, it's an ability to consciously observe, identify, and understand your emotions, thoughts, behaviors, needs, and patterns. I want to list that off again because each one of those things is extremely important and they are different, okay? It's understanding your emotions, thoughts, behaviors, needs, patterns, and the impact they have on others and your relationships. If we just say emotions, we're not going to get very far. I may be able to name what I'm feeling, but if I don't know the why behind it, I'm not really going to get very far. So it's not enough to just say, I'm sad. It's not enough to just name it. We have to know the reason why behind it. Like, so if I'm sad, I'll have to say, I have to know why I am sad, what I need to fix this sadness, and how to express it responsibly to another individual. Right. So if I don't know what emotion I'm feeling, and I don't know how I can get that need fixed, whatever, then I can't express that to somebody else. And it usually comes out as lashing out or extreme, like verbal diarrhea, we call it sometimes, when someone's just like blah, 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 with all this information. They don't know how to construct a message that's going to make sense to the other person. So, and that's because we haven't done that work on ourselves to really understand every piece of ourselves and do it almost blindly. We struggle to get emotions out. We struggle to get ideas out. We struggle to get what we're thinking out because we've never had to verbalize a lot of these things. So we can't have a good relationship without it. All right. A relationship without self-awareness is kind of like having a GPS, but you really don't have the location of where you're going. Right. So you know where, or sorry, you don't have your starting point, not the where you're going. So if I wanted to use GPS, I have to know both where I'm at and where I'm going. Well, when you don't have self-awareness, you do not have your GPS location. You may know where you want to go. I want to go to New York City, but the way to get there is going to be different if I'm in Florida versus Chicago, okay? So we have to understand that self-awareness figures out where I am at currently. It gives me things to work on to get stronger, to build towards whatever it is that I want. So we have to understand that self-awareness comes first. And it's the building block on everything else. And if you've been in here long enough, we talk about emotional intelligence. The very first pillar of emotional intelligence is self-awareness, right? It's not enough to just be aware. We have to understand the implications and the impact of our behaviors and patterns and emotions and thinking patterns and all of those stuff. Okay, so that's what gets us to that next level, which again, the second pillar is self-regulation. I don't even know what to regulate if I don't even know what I'm feeling. So self-awareness is the root of all of this, okay? So what does self-awareness actually give you? Well, the first thing it's going to give you is emotional clarity, right? When you can name your emotions and not use just like three, right? Like I'm mad, I'm sad, I'm angry. Like that's the typical ones you get from most people. But it's important to note that if I only know those three, then my vocabulary is not very strong and it leaves there's a lot of gray area, right? Somebody that's, angry, we have varying levels of anger. You have straight like hatred kind of anger, and then you just have frustration kind of anger. They are both anger, but they are varying degrees of it. So we have to start learning how to describe things. Imagine when we're looking at different, like a color that somebody's wearing, right? One person may not call this red. I call it red. Somebody might call it more of a magenta, right? The more we describe it, the more we can put that mental picture into somebody else what we're going through. But if I just say blue, right? Some people have got royal blue in their head. Some people have baby blue in their head. Some people are going to have like a seafoam blue kind of color in their head. So what we have to understand is that we've got to get better at describing the vision we have in our head or the vision we have in our heart for what emotions we're feeling. To do that, we have to have emotional clarity. And to do that, we have to understand what emotions are there. The best way to do this, I always tell people, grab yourself an emotional wheel. You can type it in on Google and you can get hundreds of different copies. And then none of them are really wrong, because they're all based on what the Psychology Society says. And you have 6 core emotions, and then you have secondary emotions. Basically, like if you have let's say you're angry about something, right? There are different parts of anger. There are different ways that we can be angry. There's a different way of being, joy is one of them. There are different forms of joy. Happiness is actually a subset word of joy. We have, in fears, you have all sorts of different fears you can have. So what we have to understand is we can't, just like I was talking about with the color blue, I can't just say I'm angry. I have to say the kind of the behind it. I'm angry because I'm frustrated. There's the secondary emotion, and that makes it easier for the other person to understand. If we don't give them that, they're gonna default to whatever their understanding of that word is. So if I say I'm angry at somebody, and their default is that I'm screaming at them, I hate them, I want them to die, then we have now put a bad image into their head because we have not been able to describe what we're feeling accurately. So that clarity lets you communicate your truth personally in a way that is not dumping your chaos on that person. It's giving you a way to communicate so that they can get a clear picture of what it looks like in your life through your perspective and lens. That's why it's so important. Again, I cannot communicate something to somebody that I have not yet named myself, right? When you go to the doctor and they ask you, well, how you feeling? Why are you in here today? Well, I'm sick. If I just said sick, that really doesn't do anything. But when I say, well, I'm feeling a little nauseous and I'm getting some like bubbles in my gut and I got a sore throat. I'm naming all these secondary things to the sickness, and the same thing goes with emotions. I have to name the secondary things that are going on inside of me so that way I get a clearer picture for that doctor or that person that I'm in a relationship with so they understand what's going on. The next thing that self-awareness gives you is pattern recognition. You become aware of the roles you tend to fall into in relationships, whether you're the fixer, the avoider, the provider, the over-explainer, those things. We start understanding those patterns and we start having awareness. I'm always the person that just goes above and beyond, even when the other person doesn't. And that pattern recognition is going to now start giving me a good idea of where I need to set boundaries, where I need to not lean into things that I know always tend to lead to bad decisions, right? And so that pattern recognition is going to really help me understand where I have gone wrong in the past. If we're the person that is always an avoider, if we're the person that's always a fixer, we can understand that it's time for me to not start fixing everything. But if I don't understand that that's a problem because I haven't done the inward look, I'm going to continue to fix in every single relationship. And I'm going to end up blaming them for not reciprocating when in all honesty, I'm giving to a relationship where they don't want it anyway. So I'm just forcing more stuff down their throat. So then we can start to say, what do I need to do to fix this pattern? But I can't know that unless I've done the work to understand my own patterns. Right? If there's an old phrase that says, until you see the pattern, you'll keep playing the part. You're going to keep doing the same things over and over again and blaming everybody else for it if you don't do the work to understand your own patterns. Okay? The next thing it's going to give you is a need awareness. Most people don't communicate their needs. They hope someone will just guess them. When you're self-aware, you know what makes you feel safe, what makes you feel seen, what makes you feel heard, what makes you feel appreciated. We know what those things are. And so we stop outsourcing our emotional health to the other people. And in all honesty, people are afraid to say what they want because number one, they feel like they're going to look weak, which it doesn't actually. And they're afraid that if they tell that person what they need specifically, that when they do it, they're doing it out of pity or something like that. We need to unchain our mind from that. And that, again, if I go through the five love languages, perfect one right here. A lot of people will say, oh, touch is my love language. Now we're now expecting that the other person knows exactly what that means. To some people, that touch is the physical intimacy that comes with it, but that doesn't necessarily mean sex. So if I say physical intimacy to one person, they're just thinking like closeness and maybe just touching, body and stuff like that. Other people may think it only means sex to them. But understanding that need is deeper than just the word touch. Just like with emotions, learning how to explain what is the deeper root there is extremely important to being successful in a relationship. If, for example, one of my needs is touch, I am a very big touch person, but it doesn't mean sex. And trying to explain that to somebody else, I have to tell them, look, it means genuine care that you want to stay physically connected to me in multiple ways. That doesn't mean that I have to be, always touching each other, but it means that like if we're sitting on the couch, put your legs over me, put your hand on my back, run your hand through my hair. Something of that nature is extremely healthy to me. That to me is intimacy. And that's what I'm looking for. But I've got to communicate that to a partner and not just say, oh, I just want to be touched. Because they're going to go to what their experience is with that. And for example, for me being a man, when I say that to a woman, if I just say touch, most women are going to be like, oh, all he wants is sex. Because that's all they're used to getting from a lot of other people. So they think that that's what I'm looking for, when in actuality, it's not. So then I have now set them up for failure because I'm not telling them what I actually need. And in doing so, I'm going to end up not getting what I need. And then I'm going to resent them and be like, well, I told them I needed touch and they're not going to get it. They're not going to do it the way I want it because I have not communicated my actual need. I've communicated the larger need, but that's it. And so it's extremely important to understand our needs in real time of what we need. And I specifically say, when I'm hurt, what do I need to come out of that hurt? Some people need a big apology. Some people need space to process. We need to figure out what it's going to take to repair what we need as a repair for things, just as much as we have the general kind of basic needs for everyday life in a relationship. Again, got to do the work. If I don't do the work, how can I communicate this to somebody else in a healthy manner? I won't be healthy. A lot of times, what ends up happening is if I don't know what my needs are, or I'm expecting them to just know, I'm going to shut down, not talk to them, not tell them. They're not going to do it. And I'm going to repeatedly over time see them not choosing me and not doing what I want. And then I end up blowing up at them. Typically, when they take an offense to something I've done, I'm going to blow it up at them over my needs because I haven't communicated them. But again, that's where expectations comes in. I can't expect them to understand my needs at my level if I do not give them a clear picture of what I'm looking at. And when we don't communicate something to somebody, so if I have an expectation that is uncommunicated, that is a premeditated resentment, meaning I'm literally setting myself up to resent that person unless they meet my needs. Now, it can happen. They can meet your needs perfectly every single time, and that's okay. Typically, that's not going to happen. They're not going to understand. If they do, they're probably getting lucky in the process. So it's important that I communicate these needs in a very detailed and straightforward way, and not try to hide it behind things, not to try to talk passive aggressively, and not try to kind of hide the ulterior motives behind it. Otherwise, it's not going to work. All right. Hopefully that's everybody understands that so far. So let's move into the next thing that self-awareness gives me. Okay. It's going to give me trigger management. We're going to stop justifying bad behavior by saying, this is just how I am when I'm upset. No, it's not. And it may be how you are when you're upset, but that's not an excuse to just let yourself act that way. That saying this is how I am, or this is who I am, is basically saying, I don't want to do the work to act in a healthy manner, so I'm just going to say this is how I am, and you have to accept me. Love is not about accepting everything about the other person. It is. But at the same time, how can I love you and watch you be the way you are when I know you're capable of better? How can I love you if I'm not pushing you to be the best version of yourself that I know that you can be? And this is where in relationships, a lot of times, it is a mirror holding up a lot of times. They're telling you where you're falling short. And instead of wanting to listen and see it, you're going to end up saying, well, this is just how I am. But trigger management goes a lot further. You start catching those triggers much earlier before they explode. And you give others a chance to connect with your truth and not just survive your reaction, right? If you can name the trigger, then you can tame the reaction. Like if I know what the trigger is and why that trigger is there to begin with, then I'm going to understand why and how to get out of it. Here's a perfect example, right? I suffer from anger every once in a while, right? Well, not so much as anymore as I used to, but I used to have a really bad problem with anger, and I never understood where it came from. It wasn't anger like hatred. It was all based out of frustration. And what's interesting is that my anger started to go away when I realized that the trigger was somebody not understanding me, not asking questions. And I realized, and I kept blaming them, I started realizing and having the self-awareness say, I'm not communicating to them in a healthy manner. I am not actually describing what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking. I'm expecting them to just know. And that's where the problem was. So because of that, we have a need to take a step back, understand why we're doing what we're doing. What is it that's triggering it so that way I can see it earlier. So now when I get in situations where I feel like somebody's not understanding me, I typically will revert back to some sort of breath control. That's the first step for me. I'll start breathing and I'll say, okay. I'll ask them, I'll say, what part of this is hard for you to understand? I get curious about what they're saying. I don't let whatever their misunderstanding be a problem about them. I see the problem of misunderstanding with me and how I communicate it to them. And so then I have to take that step back and take a couple deep breaths. And that's where my trigger management is. I know that if I allow that to go further, I'm going to get more frustrated and I'm going to have a problem. And so what we have to do is understand what the trigger is, why that trigger is there, and what steps and protocol I'm going to take in order to defeat that trigger. But again, I won't know that if I don't do trigger management. We'll talk about a bunch of ways to fix some of these problems in a minute, but trigger management is a big one when it comes to communicating healthy in a relationship. The next one is honest boundaries. All right. You set boundaries that reflect your capacity, not your guilt. You stop people pleasing to avoid conflict and start honoring your emotional and mental limits. You learn to say no without an apology and yes without resentment. Right. And I always say when it comes to boundaries, one of the biggest tools I've ever been able to use here, right, is if I think I might need to set a boundary before any request of me, because typically boundaries happen during requests, like somebody's asking you to help them move. I always say, do I have the time? Do I have the space? And so the mental space, mental capacity? And do I have the ability or the capability to help this person? If I say no to any of those three, I have to set a boundary, right? So time. If I'm already at work, I'm not gonna ruin my job and my career in order to help someone, unless it is a 911 type emergency. Okay. If somebody's dying and they need me, I got it. I can make that determination. But I can push past that limit in a temporary sense because what they're dealing with is more important. But if they're asking me, hey, I need you to help me move on Saturday. And I'm like, well, I'm already committed to this other thing with my job. I cannot be there. Right. I don't have to have guilt because it's not like I have the ability to. I don't have the time, the mental space, or I have one of the three are missing. Right. Another one that's come up before with an actual client is that they keep getting people asking to give them rides places. And I'm like, you don't have a driver's license or a car. They're like, well, yeah, they just have me drive their car. I'm like, you realize you're putting yourself at risk because they are being lazy. And a true friend really shouldn't be putting you in that position. If they know you don't have a driver's license or it's a suspended license because you have a DUI, they should not be putting you in that position that you can get in trouble and have even deeper consequences because they're not going to be there for you to drive you places when you need it. So it's important that we understand that if I don't have the capability of doing something, or I know somebody that has a better capability and they're just being lazy because they don't want to ask that person because I'm easy, then I have to tell them, like, look, go somewhere else to get this taken care of. This is not my responsibility. Without those boundaries like that, we are actually enabling other people's bad behaviors. We are allowing them to have no consequence for their action. We are allowing them to do stupid things because we are going to always be the one to pick up the slack for them. And that's not healthy for us because it ends up leading us to be drained completely. But understanding boundaries comes from understanding who I am, what I'm capable, and what I need. When it comes to like needs, when we talk about needs, we're not just talking about the needs I need in a relationship either. I need to have time to myself every single day. I need to have at least an hour where I have no anything, you know? And that could be as simple as sitting in the shower, sitting in the bathtub, going for a run, whatever it is. But I need at least an hour to myself without a dog, without people, without kids, without a relationship, without friends, without family, without anything. Put the phone down, walk off from the woods. I know that that is one of my needs, right? I know that I need, to have physical training every day. I need to know those needs because once I do, I can start setting limits that say, okay, I have a workout planned. They're asking me to do something while that's the only hour I have to do a workout. And I know that that is one of my needs. And if I don't get that need met, it's going to be a problem. And maybe the first time that happens, it's okay because, okay, it's only one day I'm going to miss in the gym in a 7-day period. That's fine. But the more we do that, we are setting up ourselves for failure that eventually they're going to keep asking and then we're going to keep doing. And then we're going to end up in a place where 3 different people are asking us to be out of the gym at the same time. And we end up with big problems. So we have to understand that those needs that we have, especially the ones outside of relationship context, we have got to protect those needs. Well, those are protected by boundaries because it's saying this is where I end and you begin or vice versa. So we have to have these honest boundaries. And then again, on boundaries that we have in other places, we have to learn those too. Whether it be relationships, what I call hard boundaries are the one like, I will not do this in a relationship. I do not share. I'm not going to be in a threesome, not going to do any of those kinds of things in a relationship. Just not going to happen. That's not me. I set that hard boundary very, very early so that way somebody else understands. I don't just expect them to be that way. If that's what their thing is, let them. I don't care. That's on you. But it's not my job of changing that red flag into a green flag by convincing them they shouldn't be in partnership with other people like that, and it's just me for them. So that boundary is a hard boundary that says if that's something they want, I'm not going to try to change their mind. If they say they want that, I'll walk away from that relationship immediately, no matter how much time is invested, because I know I'm not going to be able to change them of that. And if I do change them, they're going to resent me over it. But that comes from understanding that if you try to change what I need or I want, I'm going to end up stuffing it down and I'm going to end up resenting you over it. So it's important that I understand where the boundaries are so I know to walk away. The last thing that it does in self-awareness is give you that discernment, which we were just talking about, right? You no longer confuse anxiety with intuition. You stop mistaking familiarity with safety. And you know when you're being triggered versus when your gut is genuinely warning you. There's a big difference between your gut warning you and like you're triggered by something, right? Triggered comes from a place of, not a place of truth. Triggers are not truthful. The gut is a truth center. So that's how we understand that. So why is this critical in relationships? So, we've kind of touched on it a little bit, right? You can't ask for what you don't understand. You can't express a need you haven't named. You can't request emotional safety if you haven't figured out what makes you feel safe and what makes you feel unsafe. And without self-awareness, you either stay silent or you speak in ways that sabotage connection. And that last part right there is extremely critical for us to understand. So if we don't know how to communicate, because self-awareness is how I get the language to communicate, if I do not know how to communicate to somebody else, then I'm going to either stay silent because I'm afraid to say anything, or I'm going to wait until the most inopportune time and let it boil over out of me because I've built resentment. So it's extremely important that we understand that we cannot communicate with somebody else in a healthy manner if I don't have the language to do so. And self-awareness is the language in which we speak to others about who we are. Right? So an example of how we will lash out and we will communicate in a sabotage type way if we have not done the inner work, right? So the healthy way, or sorry, let's start with the unhealthy way. In an unhealthy way, right? If somebody canceled on us last minute, right? We're going to say, you're so inconsiderate, okay? A healthy response to that after understanding myself is I need reassurance. There's what I need, right? We communicate from a place of need and not a place of what you're doing. I can only talk about myself. That's why self-awareness, we do all this work. Our language typically changes in conflict scenarios. Instead of it being you do this and you do this, we start talking like, I feel this way because you did this and I need this to fix it. So you're so inconsiderate is a you. It's pointing the finger. Self-awareness says I need to point the finger at myself and what I need to fix this problem and what need was not being met by the way they acted. Because it may feel inconsiderate, but they may not even know that's a problem with me. So I just have to communicate from my place. So I say I need reassurance when plans change, right? I need reassurance that you're not doing it on purpose. Whatever the case may be. Okay. And by doing that, if we say it in the more I need and I feel kind of sense, we're not going to put them on the defensive. Because if I start saying you're so inconsiderate, they're now defensive. They're going to get mad at me about something. They'll probably say, well, you do it too. And then now we end up in this, like, it's an arms race. It's like the Cold War with, Russia and America, where you say this and then I say this. It's like you get nuclear weapons and I get nuclear weapons. You get ballistic missiles, I get ballistic missiles. We just continue to step it up when we shouldn't be. We are escalating a situation that we should be de-escalating with how we communicate. So again, I need and I feel statements come out of that self-awareness. Okay. Now, the next thing it does, if we are not self-aware, is we'll project instead of connect in a lot of ways. Your unhealed pain becomes the lens you see people through. Sometimes someone being busy feels like rejection. Someone needing space feels like abandonment. Someone setting boundaries feels like betrayal. Okay? Because that's all you know. That's all of your experience with it, right? And here's the key of this. When I start understanding myself, and I always say, well, every time somebody feels busy, I feel like they're rejecting me. I look back to where that rejection came from. I see that, okay, it was when person did this. Then I can now compare it and say, is this person doing the same thing? And a lot of times I'm like, no, they're not even close. Not even close to the same thing. And it makes me able to kind of step myself down and at least acknowledge that I'm feeling that way, but then communicate it to the other person and say things like, I feel like almost rejected when you go silent for multiple hours. And I just need some reassurance that it's not about rejection. Like, I just need to know what's going on with you. Just communicate with me. We're connecting with that person, right? We're telling them what I need in order to solve my problem internally to me. We're not saying they're responsible for our problem. We're not saying they're responsible for fixing our problem. We are asking for a way that we can come together in the middle and actually fix this now problem. But it doesn't happen unless I do the work on the inside first to understand what I'm projecting, right? So here's an analogy. Without self-awareness, your relationship becomes a hall of mirrors, everyone reflecting back pieces of your past. We don't like relationships because it exposes our negative parts. And instead of talking about those negative parts in the I need and I feel manner, we start to point the finger right back at them. But again, if it's a hall of mirrors, we're pointing it at them, and it's just our reflection pointing right back at us. We are the problem in that case. We have projected onto them what we think they're doing based on previous experience and trauma. Our trauma starts talking for us, not the truth of the matter. And if we don't understand the truth and we're trying to fill in the blank, that's where we have not done enough work to understand this person is not that person, and I can't hold them accountable for something that somebody else did. Hopefully that makes sense to a lot of people, because some people get it. It's very hard when it comes to projection to understanding what's true, honest projection and what is us spotting red flags in another person. But typically, if I've trained my brain to see a certain red flag, it's because I'm not happy with that thing inside of me. And that's what projection is. It's seeing something in somebody else that I know that I'm doing. So I try to shame them for what I know that is wrong. And I tell them they're wrong for doing it, even though I'm doing it. A lot of times when people are projecting a whole lot, we say, you're being a hypocrite. It's typically what you'll hear somebody say. All right. So the next one, right, is you'll keep repeating the same patterns, right? If you don't study the relationship between your wounds and your choices, you'll keep falling for the same people, starting the same fights, and blaming others for the same results. No matter what you do, you're going to keep saying that everybody else is the problem, which means that you're making them responsible for your reactions. You're making them responsible for your emotions. They are responsible for their actions that have changed your emotions or hurt your emotions, but they are not responsible for why you're hurt by it. You have to go do the work to understand why it hurts. And what's interesting is that when we do that self-awareness work, what ends up happening is they hurt you, but you'll separate them from the hurt. It won't be taken personal. You'll be like, oh, they're doing this and that hurts me because of this past relationship. So I just need to communicate to them that, look, I know you didn't know this, but in a past relationship, I went through this traumatic event that caused this issue that now I need a little more reassurance here. And we literally have now separated them from the problem. When it comes to relationships, if you want a healthy one, you have to put the problem between the two people and not keep throwing the problem back and forth like it's a bounce ball, right? You did this. Well, you did this. Well, you did this. That's what defensiveness does. We're playing ping pong with the person instead of setting the ball in the center and saying, okay, how do we solve that, right? I feel this way and I need this. Well, I'm not sure that I can do all of that, but I can meet you kind of halfway because the problem is in between us, okay? And that's what happens is we start seeing patterns, seeing our choices, seeing this awareness, and we take a step back and we're able to actually connect with the person because the problem is now something that person and I are connecting or are combating together at that point. Right? So unexamined patterns feel like destiny. Self-awareness reveals they're actually decisions, right? This is just meant to happen. You wasn't meant to break up with this person. No, you're not meant to break up with that person. Your choices and going too far into relationships you never should have been in and having patterns that were horrible got you there. That's what had happening. All right. Now, we've talked about what self-awareness is. We've talked about how it affects relationships. So how do we get better at it? This is extremely important, right? It's not as simple as just saying, "Oh, I just need to write down my emotions and my needs." It's a lot more in depth than that. So there's 3 pillars and some tools that I'm going to give you. The first pillar is emotional identification, right? Accurately name your feelings in real time, all right? Using a feelings wheel like we were talking about earlier. And I'm not talking about like trying to go back a week or 2 later. It's extremely important to be able to look at an emotional wheel either in the moment or later that day. Emotions are strongest when we first have an event happen, and they will slowly fade in time to where we're not going to understand them anymore because we're not feeling them anymore. This is why with my clients, I give them all my phone number and I tell them, look, when you're going through something, some sort of issue, text me right then and there. Right? I may not be able to respond for an hour, but the emotion's still going to be fresh in you an hour later when we start texting. And I can repattern how you're experiencing that thing. We can change the narrative in your mind while the emotion is fresh, and I can get better at it. I can't do that if it's not fresh. So the same thing here is that we need to name those emotions in real time. So if you start feeling something like, oh man, I'm so frustrated, or I'm angry, right? Go to your emotional wheel, figure out what emotion it is, and figure out the why, right? And that emotional check-in. So I like these little prompts that I use, what am I feeling? So as soon as I start, I'm like, oh, I ask myself, what am I feeling? I look at my emotional wheel. I try to figure out what word it is, right? And I'm asking myself, where in the body am I feeling this, right? Because typically the differences in some of the different emotions will actually hold stress in different parts of our bodies. If we're anxious, our shoulders go up, right? If I'm angry, my fists clench. A lot of times my core will actually flex up when I'm angry. So knowing how the body feels it can help direct us towards an emotion as well. So we pull off that emotional wheel. We ask, what am I feeling? Where in the body am I holding on to it? And what event, thought, or memory sparked it, right? So what I say is a lot of times when I start having a trigger of some sort, emotion of some sort, I get to the emotional wheel, I look at the wheel, and then I say, what does this most look like in my past? What does this most feel like that I've been through before? And why does it feel that way? And that's a really good tool to understanding why you're having a reaction to something that you're not even understanding and you're not even sure why you're having that reaction at that point. Okay. So analogy here for us is that emotions are like a smoke alarm. If you ignore them, if you miss the fire. If you overreact to them, you burn everything down, right? So we have to understand that our emotions are starting to tell us something deeper. And when we do not go ahead, like if we just let it go, it's not going to be good. It's going to end up, we're going to end up reacting to them at some point in time, and we're going to burn everything down in the process. So we have to understand where they're coming from. And typically 90% of the problem with people is that they don't understand where things are coming from. So they're reacting to the emotion. Once we understand, we're like, aha, that comes because this person in my past mistreated me. It allows the brain to separate that person from the new person that you're talking to. And you're like, this person is definitely not them. It doesn't mean that we can't feel that way and that we're wrong for feeling that way. It's now our job to express that to that person. And if we have not done the work to name our emotions, I can't tell them what I'm feeling or why I'm feeling that way. Okay. Pillar 2, pattern recognition. This is where I talk about journaling. Okay. We're going to start seeing the themes in relationships. We'll start seeing reactions to this, to that. Every time this happens, this happens. A pattern is just simply like every time this happens, then this happens. So every time someone, cuts in front of me in traffic, I get angry, right? That's a pattern. That's telling me when this happens, this happens. When I start seeing that, I'll start being able to change and disconnect from it. When this is happening, I say, oh, I know that this is the reaction I'd typically have, and it's bad. And I need to dial back. So what I do is once I see the pattern, I say, what can I do differently? And then I start implementing that change into the immediate moment, right? For people that are reactive, I say, look, if you're reactive, and if you're one of those people that gets emotionally reactive, stop, take a deep breath, take 3 deep breaths before you respond to anything. And when you do respond, the first thing I want you to do is repeat back to them. Even if it sounds stupid to repeat it back to them like a parrot, do it every single time. And you'll notice that person, because they used to get angry and then lash out, now they're angry and they're breathing. They've disconnected from the way their pattern is, and we've made a new pattern, and we're now going to start acting better in a lot of these situations. So it's very, very important to do journaling with this, right? We are looking for patterns. We are looking for triggers. So anytime a trigger comes up, and this trigger mapping and this pattern journaling is literally about not like trying to figure it out in the moment what's going on. It's getting data. We're gathering data, right? Just like a pharmacy or pharmaceutical people are going to do when they're testing out a drug, right? They want data. They want to give the drug to certain people, get the data back, and then analyze the data. That's all we're doing here. So anytime you get triggered, you write down everything you possibly can about that trigger, where it came from, what it felt like, who does it most look like, as any data you can get on that trigger. You do that over a period of time, and then you go back and you start looking at similarities between triggers. Oh, every time somebody doesn't take me seriously, we have a problem. That was a big one for me. Started realizing that one of the other reasons I was getting so frustrated with people is that, like, they didn't take me seriously, right? Like, they're like, oh, well, you don't know what you're talking about, and this actually was a big problem in my abusive relationship, is that, she would say I didn't know what I was talking about when it comes to physical training and nutrition. And I'm like, I coach people on this all the time. I have certifications and degrees on this stuff. Like, what are you talking about? And that's where the frustration would come out, was because she wasn't taking me serious. Well, then I started looking at, I didn't even respect myself. So I started respecting myself and say, look, I don't need to argue. If you're going to argue with me, you're just showing me that you're not as intelligent as you're telling me you are, and I don't need to argue with that. I'm going to walk away. But I wouldn't know that if I didn't do the pattern recognition by journaling what was going on in real time. So we have to journal, and then we have to go back and look at this and look for similarities and patterns in everything that's going on in our life. We'll start seeing the triggers. We'll start seeing similarities. And every time I pick a person that does this to me and I continue to go after them, I end up heartbreak. Well, I'm not going to do it anymore. I'm going to see it. And it's easier to stop the heartbreak when we see the trigger. Even though it's very enticing, when we're not emotionally connected to it yet, we can step away a lot easier. So it's very, very critical to understand these patterns, because if I've trained my brain to look for these patterns, I'm going to see them in real time much, much easier. But this is where I say that work is so important, because I've got to train my brain to see it, right? If I don't train my brain to see it, I won't see it. Well, how do I train it to see it? Well, I've got to do the work to understand my emotions, my needs, my patterns, my behaviors, my triggers. I got to understand it first. And then I can understand it, then I can look for it. If I can look for it, I can stop it. Hopefully that makes sense to you. A lot of people don't understand that part of it. But now, the last pillar here is value awareness, right? We understand what you stand for, and what you need to feel at peace, and what's non-negotiable, right? And what I talk about here is to build this value awareness, right? And I'm not talking about your value. I'm talking about what you value. I'm talking about what you find and hold dear. When we start understanding what our values are, we see people with the same values, we know who to attach to. Very simple explanation of this. Let's talk dating world right now. When two people try to date, and you get someone that's a Democrat and you get someone that's a Republican, right? They're probably not going to get along. Do you know why? It's because each party values different things in the direction of the country. And so it's the same thing in dating. When our values are not aligned, at least similarly with that other person, we're going to have massive problems. So a lot of times, one of the very, very, very first exercises I do with all of my clients is put them through a values exercise to figure out what they value in life. Now, if I can figure out what you value, you're going to know and why you value. You're going to be able to see those values in other people. You're going to be able to spot people that value connection and belonging and freedom and stability, which stability is one of mine. I need stability. I need a constant, consistent method to attacking life that's consistent to me, and that creates stability. I'm not talking about financial stability, but understanding my values, I'll now be able to spot it in other people. And I'll also be able to spot people that are against my values, right? So somebody that has freedom as their number one value and somebody that has consistency or stability as their number one value, we have a big problem. Because I need stability. But if I'm with a partner that is like every other day is changing plans and it makes it hard as heck for me, because I need consistency, patterns, and routines, and to be able to be feeling safe. And that doesn't mean that they're a bad person. And a lot of times this is where we start labeling somebody as toxic, right? Like, oh, they're toxic. No, they just value life differently. It has nothing to do with toxicity. It has everything to do with them not valuing the same things as you. And we can't force them to value the same things as we do. And so when I see those values out of alignment, it makes it very, very easy for me to take a step back and say, I'm done with this. You value something that I do not value, and it does not do me any good to try to chase something that doesn't value the same things as me. We all go into dating thinking we're going to find somebody that likes the same food, music, and activities as us. That's great. That's really great. I would rather have somebody have all 5 of the same values in alignment with me and have only half of the things that I like to do in music and things like that. Because a person that values things the same way as me is going to value me the same way I value them. It's okay to have things that are different, but we're all chasing somebody that likes the beach instead of the mountains like us, that likes this type of music instead of liking that type of music, that likes concerts and likes this and likes to go to bars and likes whiskey instead of wine. We're looking for somebody that's exactly like us, but not personality wise. Values, a lot of times, kind of determines a lot of personality type traits, but we don't look for values, right? So we have to start with those values. Look at making your core value list. Once you know your core values, which is typically 5, you can have more than 5, but it makes it very hard to make decisions off of more than 5. But if you have 5 values and you make that list, then you can start using that as a decision filter for how you decide whether you attach to someone, whether you put in time and effort on something, whether you do this project versus this project. But you don't know that. You don't have no awareness of what your values are. You're going to keep going all over the place. You're like, oh, I just feel so unfulfilled because your values are out of alignment, because you don't even know what your values are. And you're making a decision based on emotion, not based on value. Whatever is important in that moment becomes the decision you make and not what is the long-term goal. I have a reel that I want to do at some point in time soon. I'll probably do this, but I want to do a reel that talks specifically about the fact that, in school, they taught us math. I learned trigonometry, geometry. I wish they would have taught us a way of calculating the future cost of my current decisions. And how do we know how to do that? Well, using values and logic to make decisions and not emotion is how we do that. You can calculate future cost if you can stay grounded and you're aware of things. You cannot figure out that future cost because you're going based on what you feel right now, and that's just not a good way to go through life. You're going to make a lot of decisions if you're not making them based on your values. You're going to feel like you're out of alignment. You're like, just something feels off because you're not acting out of values. You're acting out of emotion. You're going off emotion in the moment. And this is what typically gets people to chase the wrong person in dating, is because they're like, oh, they look this way or they have this, or whatever the case may be, they're headed towards that person for all of the wrong reasons. And then they blame that person for them getting their heart broken. But in all actuality, we could have seen that heartbreak coming when they were completely out of alignment in so many different ways. But we were putting all that aside for that one green flag we saw. And again, I want to remind you guys, it's not your job to turn red flags into green flags. It's your job to see a red flag, decide whether or not you're able and capable of dealing with that red flag permanently in that person's life. And then if not, you walk away, right? That's all it should be. If we look at red flags, like if somebody was an angry human being and always screaming at people, I guess a red flag, right? You're not going to try to get that person to calm down. It's not your job to get them to calm down. They're not going to calm down just because you gave them a paragraph on, well, you should calm down. It's not going to happen. So we don't need to change red flags into green flags. It's not our job. It's not a responsibility. We walk away from them instead. Okay. So how do we have self-aware communication? What does that look like in action? Okay. So without self-awareness, communication is going to be very cold. Like somebody's going to say, you're cold and distant. You clearly don't care about me. Again, without self-awareness, we're a lot of yous coming in here, right? We're saying you are cold and distant. You clearly don't care about me. Has nothing to do with me. Once I have actual discernment inside of me, and I understand my feelings, and I understand I got to communicate from the I statements, then I'm going to start saying, I notice I feel disconnected when we don't have intentional time together. It triggers my insecurity, which I'm working on, but I'd love to talk about how we can reconnect. That right there does not place any blame on that person. It's taking ownership of my emotions and what I'm dealing with. It's saying, again, I'm working on this problem, right? And I want to connect with you. So I'm not putting this problem in between us, saying, right now, this disconnection that's happened, right, is in between us, and I want it to be solved so that way we can reconnect to each other, right? I feel disconnected, and I want to talk about it to reconnect. So in that process, I'm telling that person how I feel. I'm telling a person what I'm triggered by. I'm telling that person what I would like to do to be able to reconnect and explain to them, like, I'm working on this. I know this is a problem, but I just need a little bit of help here, right? So self-awareness transforms blame into a bridge, if you will. So it's taking that I'm going to blame you for my emotions And it's taking ownership of my emotions. And we cannot do that if we don't have self-awareness, because without the self-awareness, we're just going to think they're the problem. Well, they don't see what they're doing. It is true that, yes, like, I got a cup of coffee. If you knock into me and I spill coffee on myself, coffee is my emotions, right? I've got to change my shirt. I'm responsible for that. I'm responsible for cleaning myself up. But that does not absolve that other person. And that's where self-awareness starts to say, I'm responsible for how I feel and what I'm doing, but you're still responsible for what you've done to me. Okay. So, so that bridge is us taking away the blame out of it and saying, I'm responsible for myself. You're responsible for you. Let's put the problem in between us. Let's figure out a solution that we can go forward together with. All right. So in closing, right, self-awareness doesn't guarantee love will work, but without it, love doesn't even stand a chance. We have to, again, remember, self-awareness is the language in which I communicate to another person. If I don't understand myself, I cannot physically communicate with somebody else in a manner that's going to give them a good picture of what I'm looking at. I have a couple different analogies here that I always like to use. I like to use the one of a car dealer, right? If you don't do the work to understand what you want out of a car, you're going to go to that car lot. You're going to buy the first thing that's shiny and the right color that you like. Then 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks later, you're going to be driving that car and you're going to be like, man, I really wish it had a sunroof. Man, I really wish it had black rims. Man, I really wish it had, lane assist. Man, I really wish it had an electric engine instead of a gas engine. We didn't do the work before we went to car lot, and so we just kind of blah, 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 blah. We didn't know what we were looking for. And this is where people, I know what I'm looking for, and when I find it, I'll know. No, you don't. You can't even articulate it to somebody. So you've gone and bought the first car you possibly can. You get heartbroken when it's not what you want. So in order to communicate to that dealership what you want, you have to know yourself first, what you want, what your needs are, what you like, what you don't like. So that way you don't get duped by the first shiny thing that comes to the front. Right? They show you this car that's really shiny and it's blue, just like you like. You pick it out because it just seems right. You're like, oh, I feel like this is the car I'm supposed to have. Well, you wouldn't feel that way if you knew what you wanted. You wouldn't feel like that was your car. You wouldn't feel like it was a sign from God because you know yourself. That's why it's so very important that we do that. And then the second analogy I always use is the doctor's office. If I go to the doctor's office and I tell them I'm sick, we talked about this earlier. If I say I'm sick, that doesn't give them much to go off of, but that's what we do in relationships. What are you feeling right now? Mad. And that's it. Or you may not even say that. You may just shut down. Well, it's hard for that person to now meet my needs and what I need. And they may want to really, really badly, but if I'm not communicating to them, they can't do that for me. Right? So we have to understand that if I'm going to the doctor's office, I got to tell them all the symptoms, all the things I'm feeling and going through, and then they can accurately figure out what we got to do to fix it. If I don't accurately tell a person what I'm feeling, they can't accurately plug that hole with something that's going to take care of my needs, right? So it's very, very important that we start with self-awareness. And not enough people do this. Not enough people start like this in life. Very, very young, we don't get told how to do these things. I can't tell you how many clients have kids, and I tell them, like, look, take this emotional wheel I'm giving you, give it to your kids. And they have seen massive increases in how their kids, they light up now when they're feeling something. When a kid has a bad day at school or something, they don't know what they're feeling, and the mom tries to pull it out of them, and you typically won't be very successful. Or if you are, you'll get like just a little bit of it. You'll get the surface level. But if you have that emotional wheel and you say, look, point to the one that you feel. Now tell me, why do you feel that way? You're going to get more out of that child 1,000 times over. I've seen it with multiple clients that have used this emotional wheel with children, and they light up. And that's where we should be working with our children, is to help them understand how to regulate emotions. Because if you watch my live on the emotional intelligence, the biggest marker for success in life is somebody's emotional intelligence. You can be the smartest human being IQ-wise. You can have all the degrees on earth. But if you lack empathy and lack anything in the emotional intelligence realm, you're not going to go very far, because typically almost everything that we do in this world requires social interaction. It requires partnerships and relationships, which require communication, which require self-awareness. So I'm telling you right now, start your kids early with the same stuff that I'm teaching you guys, and I guarantee you're going to have a much better more emotionally intelligent child that's going to be able to be more resilient through heartbreaks and things like that, because we all know that it's coming, right? So that's all I got for you guys tonight. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. If you haven't seen my book, my second book is about to be coming out. I am in the editing phase right now, having a couple ghost readers, so to speak, read the book, make their choices on editing type stuff. We should be opening for pre-orders next week. Be on the lookout. It'll only be on my website for pre-orders. Everything else, once it goes to publication, it'll be only available typically on Amazon or my website. But for the first pre-run stuff, that's a first edition book. You're going to have to come through me to get that book. And then from there, I'll let you guys know how things are going. But on the lookout for this to be posted tomorrow at some point in time on YouTube. So if you want the replay, the Instagram side, there is no way to replay it unless you're on Facebook or you wait till tomorrow. Facebook people, it'll be available for about 24 hours, and then that will go down as well as I post to the YouTube channel. So if you're not already a subscriber to the YouTube channel, go over there. It's TN Coaching Collective. Get subscribed over there so that way you get the updates as things come through. That channel will be building in time, just because the way Facebook and Instagram are doing their things now with deleting certain live videos and all that stuff. But yeah, if anybody has any questions, if anybody needs more of this stuff explained at all, shoot me a message. Let me know what's going on in your lives, and we'll go from there. But other than that, I hope everybody has a great finish to your Sunday. As always, stay safe, keep the faith, and never let them grind you down. Thanks, guys.